Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Just another typical day in September. Not a lot going on in the NBA other than my beloved Boston Celtics literally falling apart at the seams. Sap, no big deal.
No big deal at all. I mean, media days Monday. I'm sure there aren't any interesting questions that the players are going to face. This was a bombshell that started to hit late Wednesday night and continued on into today. Just shocking. And again, I'm a person who's been around a long time and very few things shock me. This shocked me. And it just opened up so many questions and really no answers that I don't think the time we have on today's podcast is long enough to fill up what we have to say.
No, really, it's. I was on a show with our friend Mike Molino last night on his show on Double M Media with Marv also, and talking about this and reacting live as the punishment got handed down for Celtics head coach Ime Udoka. If you don't know already, I'm sure you do if you listen to this show, but if you don't, report came out late Wednesday night from Adrian Wojnarowski that the Celtics were set to levy a heavy suspension on Ime Udoka. That's all he tweeted, essentially. Kind of left it very, very vague. And about an hour or so later, Shams chimed in saying it was due to inappropriate or relationship he had with a member of the Celtics staff. So that's really all we had. And then for about 24 hours, Sap, the Celtics were completely silent, and the internet did what the internet does, which was just speculate and spin out of control. And there were so many sort of narratives being talked about yesterday. Unfortunately, a lot of women being dragged into this who did nothing wrong and haven't done anything, and posting their pictures and saying, oh, this is who Ime Udoka cheated on his, fiance with. This is the one who, ruined the Celtics' chances this year. Some really bad stuff. And I think ultimately the Celtics had a terrible PR day yesterday by doing absolutely nothing. They put out a statement at around 9:30, 10 o'clock last night, and then they had a press conference at 11. But so much to unpack here. But the main thing is that Ime Udoka is suspended for a year and may permanently lose his job, depending on what the Celtics decide to do at a later date.
He's never going to coach for the Celtics again. I think he's suspended for the year. And I think they did this to try to block him from going anywhere else. Maybe the Brooklyn Nets, where he has a great relationship with Kevin Durant at the end of the year. I'm sure they'll release him. There'll be a buyout, whatever it is. And then he'll be free to coach elsewhere. Also, this has a lot to do with legal ramifications. As Wick Grossbeck said in the press conference, as soon as they found out about this, they hired a prominent law firm to investigate it. If anybody knows anything about law firms, they will drag things out as long as they can because they love billable hours. So some law firm made a lot of money investigating this, and that's why maybe it took longer than it should have. The thing about Thursday being really the nauseating day that every female that works for the Celtics had to hear about her picture being put on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. And is she the one? Is she Yoko Ono? She's breaking up the Celtics. The only issue is it's still going to continue because the Celtics never are going to announce who this woman is, nor should they. So even if they had come out on Thursday and said, yes, Ime Udoka had this relationship with employee X, and that would have got the other female employees off the hook, they weren't going to do that, nor should they, because again, legal ramifications. And then you also don't want to put this woman out there and throw her under the bus. So even if they said something or put a statement out earlier, I don't know how much that would have stopped Twitter's sphere, which is a sewer unto itself. So again, I'm not supporting the Celtics here. I'm anything but a green teamer, but I don't know what else they could have done at that moment that would have stopped this. Sometimes you have to look and say there's a lot of assholes that are on Twitter that, have nothing better to do than try to figure out who this woman was and turn it into a tabloid story, which it kind of went anyway, because now the coach, who everybody loves and respects and did a great job last year, is suspended because of what he did. And it still has to fall on Ime Udoka. He's the person that did these things, and he's going to pay for it by being suspended this year. From what Wick Grossbeck said at the press conference, he will be paid, but less than what he would have normally been paid, because there'll be fines imposed. Lord knows, maybe Ime Udoka is going to have to pay for the bill to the lawyers or pay half of it, whatever it may be. I don't know. And that's really not that important, to be honest with you, because everybody's going to survive. Rick Grossbeck's a billionaire. Brad Stevens makes $7 million a year. And I think Ime Udoka is going to recover from this. The big thing here is what happens next for the Boston Celtics, who, by all accounts, are the favorites to win the NBA championship. But I think their odds went up or went down, whichever way you want to paint it. I don't know if they're the favorites anymore. And also the news that came out today that I think may be worse news is that Rob Williams is going to be out 8 to 12 weeks. I mean, it's still a players' league, and now we're not going to see Rob Williams play until January at the earliest. That may actually be worse news than anything else because he's such an integral part of it. Coaches can be replaced. We know it's a players' league, but we also gave Ime Udoka a lot of credit last year, so we can't just poo-poo the fact that he's no longer the coach, because I think he did do a good job next year. Now you've got a 34-year-old replacement in Joe Mazzulla, who has had his issues unto himself back when he was in college. So I don't like how you can paint that here's our replacement, a guy who had some sort of assault charges against a woman when he was in college. Like, maybe the Celtics are tone deaf, or maybe the media is not doing its job by saying, wait a second, you're moving on from Ime Udoka to this guy who has no experience as a head coach in the NBA and was the 4th or 5th assistant last year. They call him a back row assistant. He wasn't even sitting on the front row. He was sitting in the back row, kind of like Bob Uecker. Now he's your new head coach, maybe because Jason Tatum likes him. It's a mess. It really is a mess. And again, media days Monday, training camp opens, and the season starts in less than a month.
Yeah, it's absolutely a mess, Sap. And as far as my criticism for the Celtics organization goes, I think that yes, they obviously shouldn't and couldn't name the woman involved here. So I have no problem with that. They absolutely should not do that. But I do feel like they did a lot of the women a disservice by not standing up for them earlier and saying, yesterday at some point in the afternoon, just putting out, hey, we're going to have a press conference tomorrow at 11 a.m. We know there's a lot of speculation. Please respect, the women of our team's privacy at this point in time. Like, the Celtics organization takes these allegations very seriously. We're doing like our due diligence, etc. But they waited all day and all most of the evening.
Would have that done anything though, Jet?
I feel like it's the responsible thing to do, though, at the very least, because at least then they didn't feel like, they were it felt like they were abandoning everybody on the team.
So the female employees, which there are many with the Celtics. I mean, in executive positions, it's not just like the girls that are cheerleaders. It's a lot more positions and prominent positions that are filled by women in the Celtics organization, probably in the NBA more than any other sport. Yeah, I get it. They could have put something out there, covered their ass at that moment, and said, look, we did what we could do. We can't stop all the a-holes on Twitter. We just can't.
Right. Or just more like, we know what's happening right now. We're not completely in the dark. We stand with you. We support you. Let us have this announcement tomorrow, more formal announcement tomorrow. And also, a problem is too, like, this, I don't know how this would have been handled, Sap, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit further. Had the story not been initially leaked to Woj, I assume it was from someone in the Celtics organization. I don't know how else it would have been. Would it have been a full a year-long suspension? Would it have been something handled more quietly in-house? I don't know. And also, I feel like, the initial reporting from Woj and Shams too is problematic because it was not a full story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, imagine Twitter during Watergate. Like, that would have changed how that story was reported. So the thing is, the Celtics had to do something soon. Media Day's Monday. They couldn't have gone to Media Day and people show up and say, hey, by the way, where's Ime? Oh, he's got kidney stones. He couldn't make it today. Right. And they keep making these excuses that, he's not there. Something had to be done today, leading up to Media Day on Monday and the start of camp. So I don't know if the Celtics were just trying to delay. And then when this story popped on Wednesday night, it was like, okay, we've got to get ahead of this as much as we can. Now, the thing with Woj and Shams is, I tweeted this earlier today. The biggest rivalry in sports is not Red Sox, Yankees, Ohio State, Michigan, Duke, North Carolina, or any other rivalry, Canadians, Bruins, pick another one. It's Shams and Woj. I mean, this is what it's come to, that everything is reported by one of those two guys. And the fact that they were close before, right? Because Shams was a protege of Woj, and now they are no longer friends. Maybe they are. Maybe they discuss things, but I doubt it. So they have to beat the other one to the story. And Woj makes $9 million a year from ESPN, mostly because of what he tweets out, right? It's kind of like Adam Schefter, who makes a ton of money doing it on the NFL side. Look, they're not paying
Sure.
Woj $9 million a year because he's a great personality. I think he's dull on TV. At least Schefter has a personality and will fight with people and kind of makes fun of the fact that he's kind of a short, cantankerous
Nerd,
guy,
right?
a nerd. They're all kind of nerds at this point. You don't generally get, the guy who looks like an NFL quarterback doing this
Right.
job. But Schefter at least offers more. Woj, when he goes on SportsCenter, it's like he almost feels like Ernie Adams, who was Bill Belichick's, confidant for so many years in the Patriots, that he's kind of like, seems kind of almost like I wouldn't say a creepy guy, but just a little weird. Whereas Schefter comes across a little bit differently. So they're paying him $9 million a year. They're paying Woj $9 million a year, mostly for Twitter. So he's got to beat Shams on these big stories to earn his money. So he popped it out there Wednesday, and then Shams came back several hours later with more details. So it was just like a race to get out there first. So that's where we're at when it comes to reporting. So that's another issue going forward. As far as the leaks, maybe it was the Celtics who leaked this, and maybe they wanted to leak it to throw out a test balloon to see what the response would be. And we saw the response from former players saying it should be a fine. Paul Pierce said it should be a fine, even though he had no clue of what took place. No one has a clue what took place other than Whit Grossbeck and Brad Stevens and probably some people in the hierarchy of the Boston Celtics.
It seems like it's coming out a little bit more, Sep. Maybe some other people know, but as of on Wednesday and Thursday, nobody had a clue besides those people.
No, that's it. And maybe I'm just throwing this wild theory out there. Let me put my tinfoil hat on and go wild Alex Jones here. Maybe Austin Ainge knew something and kind of spilled it a little bit to his dad, who now runs the Utah Jazz, or maybe Will Hardy, who was, in fact, Ime Udoka's chief assistant last year, who is now the head coach at Utah, hired by one Danny Ainge, let it slip that something was going on. And Danny Ainge, we know, has a vendetta against the Boston Celtics. As Antoine Walker described Danny Ainge many years ago, he is a snake, right? So I think maybe you could go back there. And again, these are wild theories. I'll take my tinfoil hat off now and maybe talk more sense, but who the hell knows how these things happen? Woj is connected to everyone. Shams is connected to everyone. Who knows if Danny Ainge threw this out there to throw the Celtics into chaos? We know that this did not end well a year ago with Danny Ainge and the Celtics. He was fired. Yeah. He didn't retire because he resurfaced quickly in Utah, and now he's running things there. So who knows what happened? And maybe the Celtics put it out there to, again, as a test balloon to see what the reaction would be from players in the league now or former players. And I think the former players, and Jay Williams being one of them, said, this seems a bit much. And then Stephen A. Smith had a problem with the organization. And so everyone seems to have something to say about this because it's a weird story. And on the surface, it's like, okay, he had an extramarital affair, and he's not even married, but he's engaged to the lovely Nia Long. That should be between him and Nia Long. But now as we're seeing more and more of these details, it seems like it went a little further than that the consensual relationship may not have been that. Maybe he thought it was, but the woman that he was having the affair with may have thought it wasn't. So, and again, that happens in all workplaces in America. I mean, this is very, very common.
Yeah, Sap, that's why I think if we're talking about the ramifications on the Celtics, it really extends beyond this season. And depending on what the players know now and what the players in the rest of the league find out, and I'm sure, it's a very gossipy league. So I'm sure that plenty of people are going to find out exactly what happened. And I think that, most of the public will eventually. It's going to really change how people's perceptions of the Celtics, because I think the initial reaction of, okay, he had an extramarital affair and then they're suspending for a year seemed like, well, what the hell are they doing? That, is, first of all, none of really anybody's business. And if they have an internal code of conduct, then maybe that's like a 10-game suspension that they just call conduct detrimental to the team. A year seemed incredibly heavy-handed. And I don't think any of the players in the league want to play for a team that seems like they're the morality police or the heavy-handed punishment team. But now that,
they sound like Chick-fil-A, right? I mean, this is something Chick-fil-A would do to its employees because they're holier than thou. They don't open on Sundays and they're anti-gay. Exactly. So it sounds like a Chick-fil-A type thing, not an NBA team. NBA teams tend to be a bit more liberal with this type of stuff. But again, I give the Celtics credit or the league credit for standing up for women. I just wish the Celtics stood up for the women on Thursday more so than they did, as you said.
Sap, it's, it's on the surface, initially, again, it looked like, well, they're, really being heavy handed here. And, you have the optics that are bad of, okay, it's a black head coach, and Robert Sarver just got suspended for a year for saying the N-word a bunch of times over 18 years and groping his employees and sexually harassing that. So the optics were really bad too. And I think based off of just the initial reporting, people like Matt Barnes and a lot of people like Stephen A. Smith, you mentioned, were going in on the Celtics organization and saying this is ridiculous. They're, being incredibly heavy-handed here. But to Matt Barnes' credit, former NBA player, he hosts the All the Smoke podcast, which is a great show. If you're an NBA fan, I suggest you go listen to it too. Did come out today and said, I got this wrong. I've heard more details now. It's way worse than what is being thought out there. And I think the Celtics did the right thing here. He didn't offer any details because that's not really his job to do. But, to his credit, he said, I got this wrong. I think that what they did was an appropriate punishment. But that sort of leads me to this, Sap. You did allude to it a little bit earlier that perhaps they don't want him to go to another team and stuff like that. But if you suspend somebody for a year, you might as well fire them. I just don't see how something rises to the punishment of a year suspension, but doesn't rise to the termination of somebody. Could it simply be okay, we don't want him to coach for the Nets thing? Could it simply be if we fire him, we have to pay him out the bulk of his contract? I don't know. But if you're talking about the Celtics wanting to feel like they're in good moral standing, something either rises to the occasion of it's a fireable offense or it doesn't. But a year-long suspension is a completely half measure, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely, because there's always the chance that he could come back. I think that the chance of him coming back is less than 1%. First of all, would he want to come back? You've been suspended for a year. You go away, and on June 30th of 2023, Wick Grossbeck and Brad Stevens come to you and say, okay, the suspension's off. Welcome back. You can coach the team. That's going to be kind of a weird feeling for Ime Udoka. That's going to be a weird feeling for the players as well. And that doesn't even factor in what happens this year with Joe Mazzulla as the head coach. Do they get bounced in the second round of the playoffs? Do they win 48 games? What exactly happens? And Mazzulla's in a no-win situation. If the team goes ahead and wins a championship, people are going to say, well, the talent was there. They won a championship. If they falter and get bounced in the first or second round, they're going to blame Joe Mazzulla and say, see, They didn't have Ime Udoka there. They would have gone further with Ime Udoka. Now, people have brought up Alex Cora serving a one-year suspension. That's completely different. That was given out, that was issued by Major League Baseball. That was not the Red Sox that suspended Alex Cora for a year. They stuck with him and brought him back after the suspension to manage the Red Sox. In that case, it was the Red Sox, us against them being Major League Baseball. In this case, with the Celtics suspending Ime Udoka, it's us against us. This is the team mandating the suspension. So I think after 1 year, they're going to move on from him, and then he'll be free to coach elsewhere. I just think that's the way I'm reading it. Again, unless more facts come out over the next several months, can the suspension be lifted? Like I was listening to the press conference, and that was going to be the question I would have asked if I was there. Could this, if more facts come out in a month, and all of a sudden the stories get twisted around and it's not as bad as it appears to be today, and that's not likely, but just let's say it happens, could the suspension be lifted? And here's Ime Udoka, who was wrongly accused. I obviously was not at the press conference, so I didn't ask that question. Although I'll say this, I think the reporters there asked really, really good questions. I thought they were all pointed, trying to get as much news out of Wick Grossbeck and Brad Stevens, who said very little. The only takeaway I'll have from the press conference is Brad Stevens was asked, were you considered to step in as the new head coach? And he said, absolutely not. And Wick kind of chimed in and said, there was a discussion. I get the feeling that Wick wanted Brad Stevens to take over as coach, and Brad Stevens wanted nothing to do with it. First of all, what better job in the NBA than being a general manager? You don't have to travel. You travel if you'd like to, but you don't have to travel. You work a normal schedule, and you're making $7 million a year. Coaching is hard. And I think Brad Stevens has enjoyed 1 year as an executive, and it's kind of a cushy job.
You don't have to deal with the players either.
You don't have to deal with the players, right? Now, the only difference is if he was to step in as coach, even on an interim basis, although that wouldn't make any sense either. I mean, he's got cachet. He'd become the head coach. He now has more power than he did when he was coaching before, because he's also president of basketball operations. So if the players aren't buying in, he could turn around and make trades to get rid of those players. Now, you're not going to just trade Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown because you had a bad relationship with them. You'd be insane. And obviously, I think Rick Grossbeck, who's got a lot of money on the line, would step in. But the point being, he'd have more power now as a coach than he did while he was working for Danny Ainge. But I think it was best that Brad Stevens doesn't step in. Mazzulla, I don't know much about him. He's very inexperienced. He's 34 years old. He coached at Division II level in college, but the players appear to like him. Brad Stevens respects him. I also think they're going to bring in a veteran assistant. We've heard the name Frank Vogel, which that makes sense.
Oh, God.
Frank Vogel's, I know, as an assistant coach, though, he's a good defensive coach, and I think you need some veteran there who can kind of help Mazzulla with the day-to-day operations. Now, could it be Damon Stoudemire? And
they need somebody who's been a head coach in the NBA. They do. I thought
Frank
they needed
Vogel
it
makes the
last
most
year,
sense.
Sep.
Yeah, and it worked out that Ime was a home run, at least until the summer. So, yeah, I think that Frank Vogel would be fine. He's a good defensive coach. He can show us a championship ring. I know, everybody makes fun of it, that it took place in a bubble, but, he coached LeBron James and Anthony Davis to a championship, and he can give you a little bit of that consigliere feel, right? So Mazzulla, after the game, can go out to dinner with him and run some things by him to help him out because Mazzulla's so inexperienced and so young. So that's a possibility as well. But this falls on the players. Is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown going to be bought in with Mazzulla? Are they going to have a hair across their ass because they lost their coach who they like? What exactly is going to happen? And again, we're talking contracts coming up pretty quickly for both players. It looked like, I'd say a month ago, that this organization was headed in the right direction. The last month has been horrible. Danilo Gallinari injures his knee. The first report is, 6 weeks, and now he's out for the year. Now, I'm not going to blame the Celtics on that because I think that report came from Italy, from the Italian team. So they botched that up, and now Gallinari's out for the year. But now Rob Williams going to have another operation on that left knee, first 4 to 6 weeks. And as is the case with the Celtics, they always try to put on a happy face. Well, now it's going to be 8 to 12 weeks. I'm going to say you don't see Rob Williams till probably after the first of the year. So you better go get a big man, Dwight Howard or whoever, to make sure that Al Horford doesn't wear out and you're not playing with an incredibly small lineup. Maybe that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But again, looking forward, the season's less than a month away. So these questions are going to have to be answered by the Celtics. I mean, they can't just sit here and stew and bemoan the fact that Ime Udoka is gone. The organization is going to have to make whatever moves they have to make, bring in Frank Vogel, bring in Dwight Howard, whatever, and move forward. And the players are going to have to make sure that they're not in a funk because they lost their coach. It's time to move on.
Yeah, to that point, Sap, I do hope that the Celtics management and Brad Stevens and Rick Grossbeck were at least staying in touch with the players throughout this whole process. And there was an article that Shams put out on The Athletic late last night, sort of detailing a little bit more about this. And sort of, I think the key points he made was, and I tweeted this out too, was that, one, that the woman in question did possibly not feel that this was consensual, which is, obviously incredibly problematic. And two, that there was a closed door meeting yesterday between Brad Stevens and Rick Grousbeck and other Celtics owners. And it didn't mention any of the players involved. And I hope, because it's a players league, as you said many times, Sap, that the Celtics were keeping Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart in the loop, not necessarily saying, hey guys, help us decide the punishment for your head
what
coach.
do you think? We're going to vote here. It's got to be Rick Grousbeck at some point who says, I'm in charge. I have to make a decision. But keep them abreast of the situation.
Letting their voices be heard. I'm saying, if they have something to say, give them the opportunity to say it, as opposed to just making a unilateral decision and saying, hey guys, this is what we did, or this is what we're going to announce. Give them a chance to weigh in. I'm not saying that means that they have the chance to make a decision, but they should at least feel like their voices and opinions matter and are heard within the organization. I don't know that they're not. I just, from a Celtics fan perspective, hope that the team is smart enough to realize that you need to, in any circumstance in this league, be catering to your players and making sure that they feel like they're a part of the organization and not just, paid employees that are going out and, doing something and playing, basketball. Again, essentially that's what they are. But if that's all they think they are, then they don't want to play for that organization. And so the Celtics, with this situation being so sort of unprecedented and stuff like that, the best thing they can do is make sure that their relationship, that the front office's relationship with the players is steady and that the players trust the front office here, because this is obviously a huge deterrent to what their goals are this season, which is winning a championship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything seemed to be in place. And like I said, the last month has been a disaster. Gallinari, I mean, obviously would have been a nice player here. Being Italian American, I would be rooting for him. Absolutely. But that's not a giant loss. Again, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Maybe you sign Carmelo Anthony to essentially do the same thing that Gallinari does. The Robert Williams injury really concerns me because he is the key to their defense. We saw how much better they are with him on the floor than off the floor. So we're going to have to monitor that to see when he comes back and how he's going to be. Now you also have to watch the minutes for Al Horford. That's why I think it's essential to go get a big man, Dwight Howard, whoever. But this Ime Udoka story is gigantic because it really can rock the foundation of the organization. The early part of last year, he struggled. They were 18-21. They turned it around, finished 33-10 over the final 43 games in the regular season, made it all the way to the NBA Finals, and he got a lot of credit. And I liked the way he coached because I think he had the cachet. Former player, not a great player, but a role player, also coached under Greg Popovich, and just had a certain style about him that I like an authoritative guy, 6'6", good-looking guy. So, it's not a surprise that, he probably does pretty well with the ladies, but just has that thing about him that I think the players kind of respect. I'm sure the players look at Ime and go, wow, he's pretty cool, right? He played in the league, coached for Pop. He's been engaged to a beautiful actress. He seems like a pretty cool, hip guy. So I think the players who are very young and impressionable, right? And they're going to look at him and say, yeah, I'd like to be him someday, engaged to a beautiful actress and maybe coaching in the league and doing quite well for myself. So he had that ability that I think he could go to players and I'm not going to say just get in their face, but he could coach them. And I think they took it. And obviously it worked because they made it to the NBA Finals. Now we're going to have to see how Joe Mazzulla does. And apparently Jason Tatum likes him a lot. And you know what? That's important. That's your best player. Got to keep him happy. You got to keep Jaylen Brown happy. If they both are in on Mazzulla, you go from there. Bring in that veteran coach, Frank Vogel, whoever, that's going to be a good defensive coach and can kind of coach Mazzulla along as being a head coach. I think that's essential to do. And I think it's also important to get off to a really good start. So maybe this story doesn't dominate the news. It's big enough already, but if you get off to an 8-2 start, maybe it's not as big as it is right now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's going to be a lot on the players, and now they have a lot more distractions and stuff to deal with. And I was saying when I was on the show last night, before the suspension became official, and now we've heard a little bit more details because of the press conference this morning, that I don't know that the players really care about an extramarital affair.
No.
I don't think that that's something that they're like, oh yeah, this guy is a real dirtbag. Like I think that they're probably like, yeah, that was stupid, that was wrong. I don't know that they really look at it and be like, yeah, I don't trust this guy anymore or anything like that. Now, that being said, if it was a non-consensual thing, I think that they can totally grab their heads around that and saying, yeah, this was no, we don't want anything to do with this guy anymore. But if it was just, he was cheating on his fiance, I think the players are like, yeah, okay, stupid, but whatever. So
they probably are more impressed with him. They're like, wow, he's engaged to Nia Long and he's also on the side doing this, that, and the other. Like, wow, what a cool guy.
That's why, Sap, I think, again, it's of the utmost importance that the players are in the loop with everything that's going on here, not just the details of the punishment, but what exactly he did. They need to know. It's not fair to keep them in the dark.
No, absolutely not. But I think we can all agree it was a little bit more than a side fling, that it had to go to a different level. If
without a doubt,
the suspension was levied by the Celtics, and in fact, Grossbeck during the press conference today said it was multiple violations. Now, there's a difference between incidents and violations. It could be one incident with multiple violations. The way I kind of read into this, and again, we're still having to read into this because the Celtics aren't putting much out there because of legal ramifications. It sounds like maybe they warned him and he continued to do what he did, and then it went further and further and further to the point where it didn't end well with this woman. And then the woman reported Ime to Human Resources. And at that point, he'd been warned. I don't know. I mean, again, we're just speculating. And you never like speculating. And we've done that a lot through the show. but that's kind of what we do. If we don't have all the details out there, you have to speculate. And it's unfortunate. And again, it's just one of the weirdest stories I've ever seen, because again, Tuesday, even with the Rob Williams news where he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, now it's 6 to 12 weeks. You still felt really good about the Celtics. They had the highest win total in Vegas. They're the favorites to win the NBA championship. A young, talented coach with a young, talented team with a coach that everybody liked. It's like, all right, this is going to roll into another, championship run. And now there's a lot of question marks.
Yeah, it's a very strange story. It's an unprecedented punishment for a head coach in the NBA. And the fact that it's kind of open-ended, whether or not it's going to cost him his job, adds to sort of the intrigue and the gossip and everything like that. Like you, Sepp, I think it's incredibly unlikely that he comes back and coaches this team. I don't know how he can at that point. And again, the coach sort of like is in charge of enforcing the rules, especially on the road. And if he's saying to, the guys, hey, all right, curfew's at 10, why would they listen to him? Be like,
right,
yeah,
exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what are you going to be doing at 10 o'clock, Ime?
Yeah.
So I just don't see how it's going to work. I suspect he'll probably get another head coaching job in the NBA, but if it's as bad as Matt Barnes is alluding to and stuff like that, there was a report that Woj said he could be coaching another team as soon as this season. I don't see why if it's as bad as some people are making it seem, I don't see why his suspension wouldn't also carry over to another team being like, yeah, we don't want anything to do with this guy, at least for a year.
Yeah, exactly. And again, was it sexual harassment? Was it sexual harassment? Sexual assault, which is another level up. There's all these different levels. What exactly happened? And if the details come out, then the other teams will know, right? I mean, it's a very small league. So if I'm the Denver Nuggets, and I say, you know what, I want to hire Ime Udoka, they're going to go to the Celtics to try to get an idea what happened and if they should go ahead and make this move. I remember, was it Chauncey Billups that had to go through quite the vetting process when he was hired in Portland? I look at the NFL, the assistant coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, who never gets hired.
Oh, no. Eric Bieniemy.
Eric Bieniemy. There you go. I have no clue why this guy hasn't been hired as a head coach other than something happened in college, like 30 years. I remember when Eric Bieniemy played at Colorado over 30 years ago, there was some sort of issue. Like we're 30 years later, and that keeps coming up. Other than the fact that maybe Kansas City advances so far every year in the postseason and plays in the Super Bowl oftentimes that, teams move on and hire a coach and he's not available. But, and again, look, cue up Bomani Jones or whoever that's going to come out with this as some sort of racial overtones with the Celtics. That
Anna Horford was all over that last night.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, okay, the black guy's out. The owner of the Phoenix Suns got what essentially is less of a punishment, right? $10 million.
Stephen A. Smith said the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, so and absolutely, and he's being replaced by a white guy when there's a probably more qualified black coach on the sideline and Damon Stoudemire. Like, this is all going to be brought up, and a lot of it, rightfully so, right? I mean, so. I know we wanted to touch on Sarver really quickly. He's now going to sell the Suns and the Mercury probably for 6, 7, 8 times more than he paid for it. So only in professional sports can you buy a franchise, totally screw it up, turn around and sell it, for 700% profit less than 2 decades later. It's a pretty good life they lead. But yeah.
That was going to be the lead, obviously, what we're going to talk about today, prior to all this Ime Udoka stuff coming on, because, it would be a massive story. It is a massive story that somebody's selling a very desirable NBA team in, a nice warm location that's been pretty successful the past couple of years. But this Ime Udoka story is just far more interesting and scandalous. And Sarver eventually is going to sell the team because of pressure put on by the players. Good job by the players and by sponsors and by the minority owner of that team. I think that they've done a really good job making sure that what the NBA maybe wouldn't or couldn't do was done by putting public pressure on him. So Sarver's going to go. That's good for the league. But ultimately it'll be good for the Phoenix Suns. But the Celtics have a long road to recovery from this, and they already have had some PR stumbles in the past, with Kyrie Irving, and now in the guy throwing the water bottle at him, and all this accusation about the city of Boston being racist, and now there's this on top of it. It's not good. It's going to take a lot, and a lot is now being put on the players, and we know that they don't really have like a guy that's going to be like a chips are down, okay, let's rally behind this person sort of player on that team. So I don't know what's going to happen to them this year, Steph.
Yeah, they don't have a natural leader. I mean, again, the NBA, the one thing they don't have many of in the NBA is leaders. A lot of great players, but not a lot of great leaders. The first two that come to mind to me, LeBron and Steph Curry. Those are the two guys that I think do the best job of leading. And then they are also great players. It kind of goes hand in hand if you can do both. Al Horford's kind of a quiet guy, Marcus Smart, but I think sometimes Marcus Smart gets in his own way. Tatum is just not that guy. I think he just wants to go play basketball. Jaylen Brown at times seems like an introvert. They don't have a natural leader, and that's where Udoka was so good at. He was such a really good leader. And again, it's unfortunate. It really is, but he did this to himself, and we'll see what happens over the next calendar year.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can talk about too in the next show, Sap, is that, it just the fact that he's, was having his dream job for one of the preeminent franchises in all of sports, not just basketball, and he pissed it all away, basically.
Yep.
We don't know the full details yet, but really it's to do something so stupid. I said on the show last night, and I know we have about 2 minutes left, but people should have the same energy for Ime Udoka that they do for like Josh Gordon being like, or Fernando Tatis Jr., saying like, what a freaking idiot. Like he has all this opportunity. He's living out his dreams, and he can't control himself to the point where it's going to cost him his job. And I think that people need to recognize that too, and that it's a multi-layered story, and that Ime Udoka is chiefly at blame here.
Without question, he has himself to blame.
All right, Sap. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out their website. Make sure you check out our social medias at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer. We will be tweeting like crazy about the story as more of it progresses. And media day for the Celtics is on Monday, and so there will be more things and quotes to break down there as the players finally get a chance to speak about this, though I'm sure they don't want to, but that's sort of their media obligation. So we'll have plenty of stuff to talk about next week. And we will talk to you then. See you, everybody.